right, good afternoon. Glad, I'm glad we have a lively crowd. The bar isn't even open yet. It will be open later on after we're done talking. But no, I'm glad to see everybody's awake and energized. And well, welcome to the U.S. Chamber. I'm Tom Quadman, Executive Vice President for the Chamber's Technology Engagement Center. All right, there we go. And to show you things are getting back to normal, this is our second in-person event in this room today. Things are, getting back to that feel. But for the reason that we're here, the ability to move people and goods faster and safer is critical not only for economic growth, but for the advancement of civilization itself. We are in the midst of important generational changes to transportation. For those changes to reach their highest potential, we must ensure that policy development keeps pace with and supports technological innovation. This is especially true for autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles, like other areas of advanced tech, such as AI and 5G, finds the United States in a global race for leadership. The auto sector is one of the largest industries in the United States, and AVs are a critical part of their future. AVs also provide important societal benefits, improving mobility for persons with disabilities, older Americans, as well as promoting safety on the road and improving the environment. We need policymakers to step up to the plate. Inaction means that the United States loses a race and one of our key economic sectors faces a global disadvantage. Congress needs to work on a bipartisan basis to put forward a framework to allow for AVs to operate and not to use AV legislation as a means to promote unrelated policy fights. The Department of Transportation needs to create certainty for the AV industry and prioritize the safe development of AVs. We are heartened that DOT is poised to make a final decision on the cruise exemption and that a release is expected shortly on a rulemaking proposal for an AV pilot program. Together, these policies should accelerate AV deployment. Emerging state rules designed to inhibit AV deployment, such as in California, will hamper the benefits for our economy and riders. The Chamber's Sonecon report seeks to quantify the benefits of AV deployment in a more in-depth and comprehensive manner. We hope this report will inform the debate on the federal, state, and local level and lead to policy solutions that will allow for the safe deployment of AVs. To be clear, AVs are the future. The question is if the United States will lead and if Americans will be the first to reap the benefits. I'd like to thank the leadership of Jordan Crenshaw of CTEC for Matt Furlow's tireless work on this report and this event. Unfortunately, Matt is not able to be with us today. He's studying for the bar exam next week. Jordan and I were talking a little earlier. I think it was giving us PSTD, or, reliving the bar exam. But I would also like to thank the work of Scott Hall, Lindsay Rose, and Ashley Eisner and the Chamber team in releasing the report and putting this event together. Now, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Dr. Robert Shapiro, the author of the AV report. Dr. Shapiro has an impressive resume. He's been an advisor to Presidents Clinton, Obama, and Biden, as well as an Undersecretary of Commerce for Economic Affairs. Coming out of the New York State Congressional Delegation, though, I have to say probably most impressive was that Dr. Shapiro was the legislative director and principal economic advisor to Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. You had to have a lot of intellectual rigor in order to survive and thrive in the Moynihan office. I would just say that. So that in and of itself should burnish your credentials. So Dr. Shapiro, why don't you come on up and we'll let you talk about the report a bit. Thank you.
First, I want to thank again the Chamber of Commerce for their really superb support for this project. And I don't think it would have come to fruition without it. And for their line editing of my references, which were the most precise I've encountered since I did my doctoral dissertation. New technologies that change the way people conduct their daily lives have far-reaching social and economic effects. I mean, think of the automobile and the jet engine, computers and the internet, the X-ray and antibodies. And in a world organized economically around interlocking markets, those new technologies diffuse rapidly, so everyone can claim their benefits. Even so, the companies and countries that lead in developing and adopting these innovations often secure an important economic advantage. It's a first mover advantage. We see these dynamics begin to play out around one of the next life-shaping innovations, autonomous vehicles. Their rapid diffusion will be promoted by the aspects of globalization that can be described as transnational networks of economic partnerships. And striving for a first mover advantage in this global technology will be driven by the other face of globalization as a worldwide platform for adversarial competition. China embodies both aspects of globalization. Once an eager partner for foreign direct investment by American, European, and Japanese advanced technology companies, China is now an independent player in developing new technologies, sometimes rivaling the United States, Europe, Japan, and Korea. Autonomous vehicles, or AVs, are a case in point. The self-driving automobiles has long fascinated car and tech enthusiasts. Now we find ourselves on the cusp of a transportation transformation in which everyone will become passengers on moving platforms with millions of circuits, continuously transmitting, receiving, analyzing, and responding to billions of bits of data about their operations, roadway and topographic conditions, traffic movements and pedestrians, the weather, and much more. The AV is a technology that will generate trillions of dollars in annual sales, not simply because of its advanced technologies, but because its adoption will generate very large benefits. Now, we've come together to discuss the study that, again, has supported and released by the Chamber, in which I and my colleagues at Sonecon took a deep dive to examine, analyze, and estimate the dimensions of those potential benefits. And if anyone is interested, the appendix to the report includes a graphical representation of each of the models that we built in order to estimate these benefits. Now, of course, we can't know the pace and the timing of the full development and adoption of AVs, although experts believe it will come in 1 to 2 decades. But it's already begun with the gradual and incremental introduction of autonomous driving features in conventional vehicles. Experts characterize this process through 5 stages or levels of automation. Level 2, for example, is cars with certain automated features that can work together, such as lane keeping and adaptive cruise control, while drivers perform everything else. But today, we're already seeing testing of technologies for level 4 AVs, with vehicles capable of driving themselves under limited traffic and other conditions. You see them, I was just told, going up and down the Las Vegas Strip, for example, and in certain areas of San Francisco. But the full transformation comes with level 5, when vehicles are fully autonomous with few, if any, options for drivers to take control. And that's the near future. These advanced AVs use an array of sophisticated technologies to transmit, collect, and analyze these large streams of data, including next-generation GPS to precisely triangulate a vehicle's position, 360-degree radar and LiDAR, sensor systems using radio waves and lasers to determine distances between obstacles and the vehicle's sensors, advanced camera systems using algorithms to interpret image data, infrared sensors for objects difficult to detect under certain weather and nighttime conditions, including lane markings and pedestrians and bikes, and systems that enable these technologies to communicate between vehicles and between a vehicle and the road infrastructure. Most important, level 5 AVs will have the technologies to accurately interpret those streams of data and direct the vehicle's responses in an environment in which other vehicles are also responding to their streams of data, as well as vehicles that are controlled by drivers. And we also should expect, and it's another benefit of the development of AVs, that these technologies that are central to AVs will be adapted for hundreds of other purposes in other areas, generating their own benefits and revenues. What we do not know today is precisely when that level 5 future will come and how long it will take for those advanced AVs to win broad adoption. So our study created a baseline in which those AVs are common, but not so far off that they're ubiquitous. That is, when they comprise 25% of the US fleet of automobiles and light trucks. That was our baseline. The RAND Corporation has forecast that fully autonomous vehicles will be dominant by 2040. And if RAND is correct, the benefits derived from 25% of the fleet could be here by 2035, which is not very far off. That would be faster adoption, for example, than the spread of computers. And one reason is that many of the benefits of AVs will be very obvious very quickly, which was not true for computers. For example, more than 90% of traffic accidents are related to driver behavior and mistakes. Drunk driving, unreasonable speeding, distracted drivers. Level 5 AVs eliminates all of these deficiencies. So people should see quickly how AVs will sharply reduce traffic accidents. We built a model that takes account of scores of factors related to traffic accidents, both negative and positive factors. In our scenario, for example, 75% of the fleet is only partially autonomous, levels 3 or 4. Level 5 AVs are also likely to increase the average miles traveled per year by most people. And that feeds back negatively into accident rates. The more travel, the more accidents. So we were trying to take account not just of the positive factors, but the negative factors as well, so that we could have a realistic estimate of the benefits in terms of health and safety that level 5 autonomous vehicles promise. Even so, using 2020 accident rates and cost estimates, 25% adoption rate of levels 3 and 4 AVs, not the fully autonomous ones, should result in nearly 600,000 fewer accidents with 5,000 fewer fatalities and savings of about $38 billion in 2020 dollars. 25% adoption of level 5 AVs should mean nearly 1.5 million fewer accidents annually, save 12,000 lives per year, and economic savings of about $94 billion. Now, those savings come from, and here we begin to see the way that AVs affect other parts of the society. They come from lower healthcare costs. They come from reduced property damage, including to the cars themselves. They come from lower insurance costs. And they come from the productivity of drivers, passengers, and pedestrians who would escape death or injury in automobile accidents. That's a life changer, that kind of effect. We also examined the impact of AVs on people's mobility and access. In 2018, for example, nearly 25 million Americans reported mobility-related disabilities that precluded them from operating an automobile, including more than 13 million working-age adults. And today, only 20% of those 13 million are employed, in large part because even with increases in remote work, access to transportation from home to the workplace remains a requirement for most jobs. In 2022, 72.5% of businesses reported that their employees rarely or never worked remotely. And that's right after the height of the pandemic. So we also examined how AVs will help millions of older people who have difficulties accessing transportation. More than 11 million Americans age 65 and older self-report that they have travel-related disabilities. That's 20% of the population over age 65. For example, from difficulties seeing or hearing, the effects of arthritis and medications, and the natural deterioration of people's reaction time and reflexes with age. We also found that AVs will be a boon for nearly 21 million Americans who don't have driver's licenses, and for 14.5 million households that have no access to automobiles. So we built a second model to estimate the benefits of AVs for the mobility and access of disabled people, elderly people, and non-drivers. We found that 25% adoption rate of level 5 AVs should increase the annual vehicle miles traveled by, this is annual, by 2.4 billion miles for people with disabilities, 4.9 billion miles for older people, and 4.6 billion miles for non-drivers. Again, that's a life changer. Finally, we examined the impact of broad adoption of AVs on the environment and global warming. Assuming that level 5 AVs will be electric vehicles that don't produce greenhouse gases through exhaust, those environmental benefits depend on the capacity of AVs to reduce congestion and how environmentally efficient the grid producing the electricity is. Again, we factored in negative as well as positive factors. For example, the increases in vehicle miles traveled will require more electricity generation. Using current emissions for our baseline, we found that 25% adoption of level 5 electric-powered AVs and an electric grid that uses the current mix of fossil fuels and more sustainable sources of energy would reduce carbon dioxide emissions by an additional 5.9% and nitrogen oxide emissions by an additional 6.4%. With a grid that uses a larger share of sustainable energy sources, think of the recent increases in wind and solar power in Texas, the result would be 8.2% less carbon dioxide emissions and 8.9% less nitrogen oxide emissions. And so the median for that, so we have no assumption about the sources of energy powering the grid, are reductions of 7.1% for CO2 and 7.7% for nitrogen oxide. And as the adoption rates rise to, say, 50%, which will happen eventually, AVs also become a life changer for the environment. These large-scale benefits tell us that AVs are the future of personal vehicles, even without considering the benefits that their technologies will produce outside transportation. For example, AVs will be equipped with 360-degree radar based on a network of multiple microwave radar systems calibrated for weather and lighting conditions. Well, the efficiency, resolution, and scope of those systems are already being used to develop the next generation of U.S. air defense systems. And they can be adapted to reduce workplace accidents by monitoring facilities where people are working with robots. LiDAR, the remote sensing technology that emits infrared light beams from pulsed lasers, also, imagine that inside your car, also will have broad applications. Such three-dimensional imaging can be used in agriculture for topographical analysis, mapping crops and determining soil properties. It can be used to measure atmospheric gases and changes in glaciers and beaches, to assess damage after earthquakes, landslides. Law enforcement can use LiDAR to collect detailed evidence for forensic analysis. Pentagon can use it for advanced ground surveillance and spacecraft. Mining companies can use the technology for oil and gas exploration, and hospitals will use it to locate small tumors. Finally, next generation infrared sensor technologies being developed for AVs can be integrated with radar and AI to track objects ranging from missiles to nanoparticles in living organisms, to study the weather, to detect gas emissions and examine the properties of minerals. And this represents only a few of the AV technologies under development and their potential application. And keep in mind, it is only because personal transportation is a multi-trillion-dollar industry that you have the incentives to develop these technologies, which then have cascading benefits across industries and sectors. There are a lot of life changers in those technologies. Finally, we have to consider which nations and companies will shape the future being created by AVs. Who will be the first to market with safe and flexible technologies and establish the standards and regulations necessary to win broad public acceptance? The data-intensive operations of AVs will also produce huge amounts of personal and industry-sensitive data for manufacturers, or in the case of countries like China, for the government. The global leaders in AVs will also influence how those data are stored, accessed, and ultimately governed. Now, the United States and other Western countries are major players in today's global auto and light truck industry. But China is now the world's largest vehicle producer and the world's largest vehicle market. In 2022, 27 million vehicles were produced in China. That compares to 10.1 million in the United States, 7.8 million in Japan, 5.5 million in India, and 3.8 million in Korea. Similarly, sales of autos and light trucks topped nearly 24 million units in China last year. That compares to less than 14 million units in the United States, roughly 4 million in Japan and 4 million in India, and less than 3 million in Germany. To be sure, Western vehicle manufacturers compete successfully inside China's market, and Japanese, German, and US factories located there account for half of the country's domestic vehicle sales. Chinese vehicle manufacturers also have not yet established meaningful footholds in the US or European markets, but they are major players in Latin America and the Middle East, and Chinese electric vehicles are being marketed today in Europe. China isn't shy about its plans to become the world's first mover in AVs and their technology. It's part of China's current and recent 5-year plans, and it depends on a very straightforward strategy. Provide extensive subsidies for the country's 14 state-owned vehicle producers, its more than 40 independent domestic car makers, and state-owned and private Chinese enterprises developing the computer, telecom, and software technologies for AVs. The United States and other Western countries take a different approach. We remain committed to promoting innovation through competition, a strategy that also produces large advantages for the development of AVs. Competition is one of the reasons why American motor companies have the world's most extensive networks of suppliers, production facilities, and customers, creating efficiencies still unavailable to Chinese producers. U.S. companies also dominate many of the technology markets critical for AVs. U.S. companies account for 8 of the world's 10 largest software development companies, 5 of the top 10 global producers of telecom equipment, and 5 of the world's top 10 computer manufacturers. Even so, our analysis shows that it's time for U.S. policymakers to consider measures to help promote the continuing innovation and technological leadership of American companies in this critical area. It's time for policymakers to consider the standards and investments we will need for the safe and secure deployment of AVs in the United States. And it's time to recognize the economic and social stakes in America leading the world in AV development and deployment as we did a century ago for the automobile. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Shapiro. I think the report is fascinating, and for folks who want to see a copy of it, by the way, we have QR codes up on the screen. I'm Jordan Crenshaw. I'm Senior Vice President. I get the pleasure of leading the day-to-day at the U.S. Chamber's Technology Engagement Center, including the work that is done on AVs, led by Matt Furlow. And really an important issue for us going forward to make sure that we remain competitive on AVs. Dr. Shapiro, I think what I liked about the report the most is, as you mentioned, it has a very honest take about how to address the econometric data that's in there with the accident numbers and really robust numbers about how do we look at this from an environmental and safety and cost savings perspective. But if you had a chance to do further research, where would you look beyond this report?
Well, I think one really important area and important for the social acceptance of AVs are the employment effects. And the employment effects are very complex. They're complex because there are a lot of negatives as well as positives. We're going to have to train and employ millions of people producing all of the technologies that go into AVs. But at the same time, autonomous vehicles supersede, for example, a lot of delivery drivers or shared ride drivers. Ultimately, there is also a lot of work being done on large AVs for large trucks. And those trucks would be, they're called CAVs, connected autonomous vehicles. It's a very complicated set of challenges. On the one hand, it deals with less traffic issues than passenger cars. On the other hand, these are large vehicles, often carrying volatile or dangerous materials. And so the safety issues around those will be very great. But the fact is, there are a lot of truck drivers in the United States. So there are all these negative economic effects. But the positive economic effects should generate millions and millions of jobs, not just in the people who are producing and then selling and servicing autonomous vehicles, but again, When you save 10, 15, 20, 25 million lives, thousand lives a year, you are preserving the productivity of most of those people, and that productivity becomes demand, and the demand generates employment. So it has very large employment effects, both directly and indirectly. Same thing is true of employment related to the potential to increase access and mobility. The other reason why I think employment is the next issue to address is that our politics are very sensitive to it, necessarily so. And so if we're going to promote the adoption of autonomous vehicles, we're going to need solutions for the adverse effects as well as the positive effects. The closest parallel I can think is trade, where you have broad, diffuse benefits that are enormous, and you also have some concentrated costs or losses. And politically, you have to address both.
It's fascinating, I think, in terms, you mentioned the job piece and also the trucking piece. I know there's a shortage of truckers in the United States, and I think that is clearly an issue where, the technology can augment where there's a need. And, we have some time to do some audience Q&A, and we'll actually have some folks with microphones throughout the room if folks want to ask any questions of Dr. Shapiro about the report. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and open up the floor. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. I have one question here, and then I have a question over there. So we'll start in the middle of the room. Question was, what is the most advanced country when it comes to AVs right now?
The United States and China. They have been the most committed to it. There are level 4 autonomous vehicles operating in parts of Beijing and Shanghai today, as there are in parts of San Francisco, Phoenix, Los Angeles. And the United States and China are the countries with the technological infrastructure to really develop these vehicles. That is, you need a very robust computer industry. You need a very robust telecom equipment industry. You need a very robust software industry. Their advantage, again, is they'll throw billions of dollars in subsidies directed to this, to their state-owned and state-affiliated, i.e. private companies. Our advantage is we lead the world in all those areas, and the United States has long had a cultural advantage as well as a political advantage in promoting entrepreneurship and innovation. And like pharmaceuticals, a lot of these innovations will initially come from startups, and then they'll be adopted by larger companies or bought out by larger companies. So this is a fight between the United States and China, although who would have predicted that the first mover in cellular phones was going to be Finland? Nobody. So that is Nokia. Innovation can happen anywhere, and critical innovation can happen anywhere.
So just as a follow-up question to that, coincidentally, Polestar automakers just debuted in downtown D.C.
Pardon? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Polestar is an automaker that just debuted in downtown D.C. at 1050 17th Street. It's the only other new car dealership besides Tesla based in the district, or has a showroom in the district. my understanding is Polestar is affiliated with Volvo, which is affiliated with the Chinese mothership, if you will, so to speak. But there is that coincidence, or is it not?
It's an expected aspect of globalization. The fact is that all advanced products now have global markets, and companies want to be affiliated with other companies that know those markets. The United States long led the world in foreign direct investment in the developing world, while Europe did foreign direct investment in Europe and the United States. We were doing it in China and India and Latin America. So we have greater networks than global networks than any other country. But it's not the only thing that will matter. Just happens to be our advantage.
We had a question over here, actually, too.
Dr. Shapiro, in your research, did you differentiate between classes of autonomous vehicles?
Pardon me?
Did you differentiate between classes of autonomous vehicles?
Yes. We describe what are conventionally thought of as the 5 levels of autonomous vehicles. All of our models looked at both level 4 and level 5, the impact of level 4 and level 5 autonomous vehicles. As expected, the greatest benefits are derived from the most advanced AVs. But it also tells us that on the way to level 5, we're going to begin to see significant benefits from level 4, from the broad adoption of level 4 autonomous vehicles, which in my view will be necessary in order to secure public acceptance of autonomous vehicles. A lot of people are going to be very nervous.
Actually, I was meant, maybe I didn't articulate the question properly. Did you differentiate between shared use mobility, like autonomous shuttles, robo-taxis, commercial vehicles, autonomous buses? Did you differentiate in that manner? Because some segments are advancing much more quickly and being deployed more quickly than others and have different advantages.
Well, certainly in our mobility analysis, for example, the assumption was all shared ride vehicles, which is frankly necessary for the economics of it. We did not make that distinction with respect to the environmental analysis, and the safety analysis assumes both shared and personal driven vehicles. But I do think that the shared ride AVs are going to be at the kind of forefront of the adoption of AVs.
I have time for, I think, one more question for the audience. I have a question in the back.
Here you go.
Oh, thanks. You mentioned indirectly, and actually quite directly, some of the political implications of this innovation. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little more on your take of the current political acceptance of the ongoing innovations. And I understand what your comments about the future, some of the future issues, but what is the current level of acceptance in our political class?
Well, I think our political class, i.e. all of our friends and neighbors in this city, all accept innovation as a central factor in economic growth and development. And let me say, this is a surprisingly recent development. You know, was mentioned, I was Bill Clinton's principal economic advisor in the '92 campaign. And because of work I had done on a esoteric issue called endogenous growth theory, I was very interested in innovation. And I talked to him a lot about innovation. And I would give talks about innovation all the time and in Washington, and people's eyes just glazed over. You know, they did not get it at all. But by the late 90s, the internet was beginning to transform people's lives. And suddenly innovation made sense to people. And I think since then, it is commonly accepted to be a central issue. Now, how we approach it is right now a matter of very live debate. You know, you only have to look at the CHIPS Act to see that debate. You know, the United States is moving towards a kind of free market-based regime of subsidies. Subsidies are available for whoever, not for a particular company, but for anybody who can develop what have been identified as critical areas. Now, this kind of industrial policy has a very bad reputation, deservedly so, because the government has been very bad at identifying industries that in fact are going to succeed. Well, I would say that that deficiency applies only on the margins to something like the CHIPS Act, because we know how central that is. You know, if we were trying to subsidize a particular area of nanomaterials, I would think we'd be crazy. You know, the technologies that are going into autonomous vehicles and autonomous vehicles themselves, these are not things that may or may not take hold. These are things with both present and clear future impact. And so I think we have to, my own personal view, I'm certainly not speaking for the chamber here, my own personal view is I think we need to re-examine those issues and be very careful in how we implement it. But it's, you know, similar. I was in a kind of group discussion with about 15 people from China, either government officials or officials at World Bank or IMF and Chinese business people in Washington. And they were complaining bitterly about the CHIPS Act. And I said, well, you know, you've been subsidizing everything for decades. And that was fine so long as while you were a developing country. Well, now you're a direct competitor. So that means you get treated differently. And look, this is the US-China competition. You know, there has, you know, for a century, there has not been another country in the world that was in our league economically, in terms of the size of the economy, as well as the performance of the economy, at least over the last 60 or 70 years. Well, now there is. And we have to adjust our policies to take account of it. And particularly because this new competitor has the efficiencies as well as the incredible weaknesses of dictatorship, which also makes the competition, raises the stakes for the competition in terms, since we are also the two great emerging world powers. So it's a complex and very serious area of analysis and debate.
I think that goes to show there are a lot of complex policy matters at stake, and we might talk a little bit about those more in the next panel after this. But I just want to thank Dr. Shapiro for the excellent report. Let's all give Dr. Shapiro a round of applause, please. Thank you.